I'm Ginny Messina. I'm a vegan dietitian, and I am very happy to be here today at the Madison Veganfest. Happy to be in Madison, and always happy to be talking with fellow animal advocates about healthy vegan diets. I'm going to be talking about the 7 habits of healthy vegans as a way of describing the optimal vegan diet. And if you're new to veganism, just taking some steps in that direction, I hope that this will give you some confidence in knowing that you can plan a healthy vegan diet with ease. And if you're already vegan, if you've been vegan for a while, I'm hoping that you'll find something new to take away with you today, because we're going to challenge a few of the misconceptions surrounding vegan diets. Now, when I talk about optimal vegan nutrition, of course I'm talking about a diet that meets nutrient needs and that does so in a way that reduces risk for chronic disease. But it's not optimal if it's too hard to eat that way. So an optimal diet has to also be practical and easy and realistic and appealing. And as a vegan advocate, these are things that I feel really strongly about. The fact that we need to be honest about where vegan diets can sometimes fall short, and know easy ways to correct those shortfalls. And that we also want to remove restrictions that create barriers towards going vegan, so that we can make it as easy as possible for everyone to adopt a vegan diet or to start taking steps in that direction. So I'm going to be talking about meeting nutrient needs in practical ways, in realistic ways, and I'm going to focus on the 9 nutrients that are sort of at the heart of vegan nutrition, either because people have questions about them or because they are nutrients that need a little bit of extra attention in vegan diets. It's not because it's difficult to meet needs for these nutrients. It's not difficult at all. It's just that for those of us who grew up in omnivore families, it represents, we need to find new ways of meeting nutrient needs and of eating. So vegan diets are not difficult. There's just a little bit of a learning curve with vegan diets because we do things a little bit differently. We can talk about all of these things, all of these issues, meeting nutrient needs, reducing chronic risk disease, practical issues, through these 7 habits of healthy vegans. Or you can think of them as sort of 7 guidelines or recommendations. And I'm going to cover a fair amount of science as I talk about the reasoning behind these recommendations. And then at the end of the talk, I'll summarize and highlight the most important things that you need to know. And you also have a handout with a food guide on it, and the core concepts that I'm going to cover today are all summarized on that handout. So that's the most important stuff that you need to know. And then finally, at the end of the talk, I'll give you my contact information. If you have questions and want to follow up with me about those, or if you'd like copies of my slides, you can email me, and I'll help you with that. So let's start with legumes and talk about why they're so important in vegan diets. Legumes are a big answer to that really annoying question, where do you get your protein? We vegans know that we get our protein from almost everything that we eat. The only plant foods that are not good sources of protein are fats and fruits. So we have a wide variety of foods in our diet that are providing protein. Our need for protein is actually a need for amino acids. We take foods, protein-rich foods in the diet, break them down in our intestines into their individual amino acids, rearrange the amino acids to make new proteins that the body needs. And we can synthesize some of the amino acids that we require, but there are 9 of them that the human body can't synthesize, and so we must get them from food. These are the 9 essential amino acids. They're required in the diet. All plant sources of protein, all grains, legumes, nuts, seeds, and vegetables do provide all 9 of the essential amino acids. It's not true that they're missing or completely devoid of any of them. They have them all. They always tend to be a little bit low in 1 or more of them, though. Legumes, which include cooked dried beans, peanuts and peanut butter, and a vast array of soy foods, are the only good plant sources of the essential amino acid lysine, and that's why they're so important in vegan diets. There's no official recommendation for how many servings of lysine you need to eat every day. But when Jack Norris and I were working on our book, Vegan for Life, we ran numerous calculations of all different kinds of vegan diets for men and women, all different calorie levels. And we determined that you are really going to need to eat at least 2 servings of legumes per day in order to be sure that you're meeting lysine needs. I recommend 3 servings per day because it gives you a little bit of extra insurance. If you have some discretionary calories in your diet, you know, if you're eating some sweets, some treats, then you might want to add an extra serving of legumes just to make sure you're meeting lysine needs. And a serving of legumes is a small amount of food. It's a half a cup of cooked beans, tofu or tempeh, a quarter cup of soy nuts or peanuts, 2 tablespoons of peanut butter, a cup of soy milk, or 1 ounce of a veggie meat. A couple of other foods that are not botanically legumes are sort of honorary legumes. They can fit into this group because they're high enough in lysine that they can stand in for other legumes. So we can add those to our list of legume serving sizes. A quarter cup of pistachios or a cup of quinoa can count as a serving of legumes. Now I think that people sometimes get a little bit overwhelmed at the idea of 3 servings per day of legumes. If you're like me, you didn't grow up eating those foods. They were never on the menu at my house. And so these were foreign foods when I went vegan. But if you keep in mind that the serving sizes are small, and this is really a very diverse group of foods, not just beans, but it's soy foods, including the veggie meats, it's peanuts and peanut butter, it's pistachios and quinoa, it's not that difficult. And if you look at this list of samples of serving sizes of legumes, you can see that there are choices here, like a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, or a trail mix, or a hummus wrap, that are pretty much friendly and familiar foods to most people. So even for those who are not big on beans, it shouldn't be so scary to start taking steps towards vegan diets and looking for legumes that you can fit into your diet. You can have a peanut butter sandwich and be done with it, and that's pretty easy. In the old days, we thought that you had to combine certain plant foods in order to get all of the amino acids in the right amounts. I'm sure some of you remember that. That is not true. It's been shown to not be true. Now we know that as long as you consume adequate calories to maintain a healthy body weight, you're eating a variety of foods and not overdoing it with junk foods and sweets. And you consume at least 3 servings of legumes per day. You will meet your protein needs and your lysine needs with ease. It is not something that you ever have to worry about as long as you're doing these things. The second habit of healthy vegans focuses on fruits and vegetables. I think everybody knows that these foods are really good for you. They're high in nutrients, low in calories, which makes them very nutrient dense. They're loaded with chemicals that may protect against cancer and other chronic diseases. And a diet rich in fruits and vegetables is also very good for bone health, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. But in addition to eating lots of fruits and vegetables, it's also important to eat a variety of them. Because for vegans especially, certain fruits and vegetables have certain strengths. For example, it's important to try to include a good source of vitamin C in as many of your meals as possible. And that's because vitamin C has a crucial relationship with iron in vegan diets. Vegans eat plenty of iron. Plant foods are really rich in iron, and studies show us that vegans often have higher iron intakes than people who eat meat, which is very interesting, very surprising to many Americans. The problem is that the iron in grains and legumes is bound to a compound called phytate, which reduces its absorption. Vitamin C breaks the bond between phytate and iron and dramatically increases the absorption of the iron. But it has to be present at the same time as the iron. You can't pop a vitamin C pill in the morning or just drink a big glass of orange juice and hope that that will take care of your iron absorption needs for the day. You have to eat a good source of iron and a good source of vitamin C at the same time. And so the more often you do that, the more often you're going to be absorbing iron from foods at a fairly high level. So again, we don't need to worry so much about the iron because most of us are eating a legume or a grain at almost all of our meals and snacks. And we can also use leafy green vegetables and dried fruits to help meet iron needs. There's a little bit of iron in almost all plant foods. So we don't need to worry about that too much. We're automatically doing that on our vegan diets. The thing to pay attention to is to make sure you're including a good source of vitamin C in as many of your meals as possible. And the best sources are, of course, citrus fruits, strawberries, green leafy vegetables, peppers, cauliflower, cabbage, and tomatoes. Fruits and vegetables are also important for vitamin A. There are two kinds. Vitamin A actually refers to a group of compounds. Retinol is the preformed vitamin A. It's the kind of vitamin A that our body uses, and it's found only in animal foods. But plant foods contain compounds called carotenoids, which can be converted into vitamin A. And we can get all of our vitamin A from these carotenoids with ease. It's not at all difficult. The one that's most familiar to people and the one that's most abundant in foods is beta-carotene. Dark orange vegetables and deep leafy green vegetables are excellent sources of beta-carotene and therefore excellent sources of vitamin A. And you can see that you don't need to eat very much of these foods at all to meet your vitamin A requirements. A quarter cup of carrot juice, just 2 ounces of carrot juice per day would be enough to take care of your vitamin A. And you're probably getting more anyway from other foods that you're eating. So if you're including these vitamin A superstars in your diet, you won't have any problems meeting needs for this nutrient. Some fruits and vegetables are also good sources of calcium, which brings me to my next point. Which is that healthy vegans need to make sure that they're getting adequate calcium. Obviously, calcium is important for bone health, but it's far from being the whole story. Bone health is really complex, and there are many factors that affect how strong your bones are and your risk for getting osteoporosis. Factors that are protective include exercise, a diet rich in fruits and vegetables, a well-balanced diet that has plenty of the minerals calcium, magnesium, and potassium, and also enough of vitamins D and K. It's also important to get enough protein to protect healthy bones. Factors that are harmful, that raise risk for osteoporosis, are diets high in sodium, smoking, excessive alcohol consumption. Small amounts of alcohol consumption do not impact bone health, but excessive consumption does. Sedentary lifestyle, low body weight. This is one area where it is actually better to be carrying around a few extra pounds because it protects your bones, and being underweight or losing weight causes bone loss. And then finally, poor nutrition. Just not meeting nutrient needs is bad for your bones, of course. Now there's a surprise on this list for many vegans, and that's that protein is in the beneficial column. Because isn't protein bad for bones? We used to think that it was. We used to think that diets high in protein were one of the major causes of osteoporosis and differences in osteoporosis throughout the world. And the reason for that is that diets that are high in protein, especially protein from animal foods and from grains, makes the blood more acidic. And that's a dangerous situation. We can't have acidic blood. So this kicks off a series of physiological reactions aimed at bringing the blood back to a more normal or neutral pH. And as part of those processes, calcium is leached out of the bone, and then it's eventually excreted in the urine. So the theory was that the more protein you were eating, the more calcium you needed, because you were losing calcium from your bones and eventually you're losing it from the body completely. We have some interesting worldwide comparisons to back that up, and many of you have probably seen this. The findings that hip fracture rates are highest in countries where people eat the most protein. And that's an interesting finding. But a great deal of research over the past 2 decades has caused us to reevaluate all of this. First of all, the studies of hip fracture rates are what are known as ecological studies. These are studies that pool data from different groups of people and then compare the averages. They're good for generating hypotheses, but they can't be used to draw conclusions about diet and health. We never draw conclusions about the relationship of diet and health based on ecological studies. We only use them as an impetus for doing more studies. The reason for that is that there are so many lifestyle factors that have an effect on these differences, and they're not taken into account in these studies. For example, the hip fracture, there are a number of factors that affect the hip fracture rates. There are differences in hip anatomy among different cultures, different ethnic groups, and Asians have a hip structure that is protective against breakage. So all other things being equal, older Asian people are less likely to break their hip. Cultural habits also have an impact because they have an impact on how often people fall. And if people, and in cultures where older people don't fall very much, they're less likely to break their hip. And so that doesn't get picked up in these ecological studies. And then finally, of course, physical activity has a tremendous effect on bone health, and it varies greatly throughout different cultures. But here's the really interesting thing. When we look at bone health in the spine, and we look at differences throughout the world, we see that it doesn't correlate with protein intake. And that tells us something really important. Because if protein was the reason for the increased hip fracture rates, we would see that in all parts of the skeleton, not just in the hip. So that tells us that it's probably these other factors that are responsible for the differences in hip fracture rates among the cultures and not the protein, or else we'd be seeing poor bone health in the spine as well as the hip. And another important finding related to this is that studies where they actually feed protein to people and look at the results have found that higher protein diets are associated with increased absorption of dietary calcium. And it appears that the increased absorption of calcium compensates for any calcium that's being lost from the bones, or it may overcompensate for it and actually cause a better calcium balance. So what we know about bones now, about protein now, is that it is possibly in some people, especially older people, higher protein intake may be beneficial. For most people, it's probably just benign. It probably has a neutral effect. It is important to keep the blood from becoming too acidic, and the best way to do that is to eat a diet that's rich in fruits and vegetables. These are alkalinizing foods, and there is evidence that people who eat diets that are high in fruits and vegetables have stronger bones. So the current view now on bones and diet is that eating a diet that gets plenty of protein, plenty of calcium, and is very rich in fruits and vegetables is the diet that is most effective for protecting bone health. And of course, for protein, for vegans, the best sources, as we talked about, are legumes. So making sure that you're eating those 2 to 3 servings of legumes per day is important also for your bones, not just for getting enough of the amino acid lysine. Our ancestors had no trouble getting adequate calcium without cow's milk. Cow's milk and other dairy products didn't come on the scene until about 10,000 years ago. And there's evidence that our earliest ancestors had very high intakes of calcium, as much as 3 times our current RDA. And that's because they foraged for wild leafy greens that were very rich in calcium. A lot of those greens are lost to us today, but we still have many good sources of calcium in the diet for vegans, for anybody. The best way to make sure that you're meeting calcium requirements is to consume at least 6 servings per day of foods that provide between 90 and 150 milligrams of calcium. And these foods are all listed on your handout. Now, 6 servings sounds like a lot, but it's important to keep in mind that contrary to what the Dairy Council would have you think, it's not necessary to consume foods that contain huge doses of calcium. We can get our calcium by eating a variety of foods that offer more moderate amounts. That's a healthy way to eat, it's a practical way to eat, and it's just as good as taking a big dose of calcium, and probably better. And for those of you who are not familiar with calcium-set tofu, that is just tofu that's made with calcium sulfate. So it will say calcium sulfate on the label. Look for tofu that's made with calcium sulfate because it's higher in calcium. The best green leafies that are good sources of calcium are bok choy, collards, kale, and turnip greens. A handful of leafy greens can't be considered good sources of calcium because the calcium is not absorbed. And these are spinach, Swiss chard, and beet greens. So don't depend on those for your calcium because you're not going to absorb very much of it. I want to speak very briefly about whole grains. I know that probably most people in this room are eating lots of whole grains, and they are important in vegan diets. It is okay to eat some refined grains. Certainly for vegans, you know, fiber is not the issue for us that it is for other people, and so it's okay to not have every single serving of grains in your diet be whole ones. And some recent research showed that people could consume up to 50% of their grains in the refined form without it having any effect on chronic disease risk. Although when I talk about refined grains, of course, I'm talking about white rice and pasta, things like that, not Twinkies and Doritos. Whole grains are important for vegans, though, for one very particular reason, and that's that they're good sources of the mineral zinc. And this is a nutrient that can sometimes fall a little bit short in vegan diets. So we do want to identify good sources of it in meals, and whole grains are one of the best. Zinc is another nutrient that, like iron, is affected by phytate in grains and legumes. So its absorption is not always very good. Vitamin C will increase zinc absorption, but it's not nearly as dramatic as the effects are for iron. One thing that does increase absorption very well is the fermentation that takes place when when whole grains are leavened with yeast or sourdough. That process liberates zinc and makes it much more absorbable. And sprouting grains also make zinc more absorbable. So if you like to do that, that's a good thing to do for your zinc nutrition. Vegans also need to be smart about fats. And omega-3 fats are a pretty interesting and important issue in vegan diets. And they're also a complex issue because there are two types of these omega-3 fats and people sometimes get them confused. Alpha-linolenic acid, which is abbreviated as ALA, is the short-chain omega-3 fat. It's an essential nutrient. We have to have it in our diet. And the best sources are flax and hemp seed, flax, hemp, canola, walnut oils, and whole walnuts. And your handout has a list of those foods and has the amounts that you need to eat in order to meet your requirements. The other type of omega-3 fats include the long-chain fatty acids, DHA and EPA. These are the ones that are found in fatty fish, and research has associated them with protection of heart health and also neurological health. They may reduce risk of things like depression and dementia. They're the reason that a lot of people take fish oil supplements, of course, and that fish oil supplements are very popular. These are not considered to be essential nutrients. We don't necessarily need to have them in our diet because we can synthesize them from ALA, the essential fatty acid. The reality is that synthesis appears to be pretty inefficient. And we know that people who don't eat fish, which includes vegans, of course, have low blood levels of DHA and EPA. Now, a study that was published a couple of years ago, back in 2010 from the United Kingdom, had a really rather astounding finding that the vegan women in the study had higher DHA blood levels than anyone who ate meat in the study, in the fish eaters. And that was kind of interesting, and it's been very tempting to use this study to try to prove that vegans don't need to worry about DHA and EPA. But the fact is that the study is probably an anomaly for several reasons. One is that in this study, vegan was defined as someone who had not consumed animal foods in the past 7 days. And out of the 4,902 subjects in the study, there were only 5 vegan women. And among those 5 vegan women, there was a really big range of DHA levels. And that tells us that some of the women had really low levels. So we need to kind of put this into perspective and realize that there are some problems with these findings. They're not in sync with what other research is showing us about vegan levels of DHA. And so I think we want to put it into perspective. I wouldn't want to be making recommendations to vegans about their DHA needs based on this piece of research. And anyway, it's not true that we have to eat fish in order to get DHA and EPA. Fish get their DHA and EPA from microalgae, and we can get it from the same place, so we don't have to go swimming to get it either. There are a number of supplements on the market now that contain DHA and EPA derived directly from algae. They're packaged in non-gel caps, so they are vegan. And it is the exact same, these are the exact same fatty acids you would get from eating fish. There's absolutely no difference. It's just as good. It's just as good a way to get it. And it's actually a better way because we can keep growing more microalgae, and it's a much more sustainable way to get these fats. We're not going to be able to support the fish oil industry the way it's growing right now. So the big question is, do vegans need to take supplements of DHA and EPA? And we don't really know the answer to that. The studies on health benefits of these fats have been fairly conflicting, and we don't know how important they are, especially for people who are already eating a heart healthy diet. Most vegans are eating a heart healthy diet, so do they need these fats? We don't know. We don't know that they're not important, but we don't know that they are important, but we also don't know that they're not important. And we do know that vegans have lower levels. So to be on the safe side, I do recommend a small dose of these fats, 200 to 300 milligrams of DHA plus EPA combined, 2 to 3 times per week. If you suffer from depression, if you're at high risk for heart disease, if you're over the age of 60, you may want to take this amount every day. It's still a little bit lower, actually, than what most health organizations are recommending. So this is a very moderate kind of recommendation, just a little bit of insurance. So there's also this question of how much total fat we should be including in vegan diets. Vegans tend to eat less fat than omnivores, but our diets are generally not what most people would consider to be low fat. These are some findings from the EPIC Oxford study in England. It's research that has given us a great deal of information about vegan health. And you can see that among these subjects, vegans ate a diet that was about 30% fat, and the meat eaters were about 34% fat. The vegans had much lower intakes of saturated fat, and as a result, they had much healthier cholesterol levels. This tells us where the consensus is now in the scientific community regarding fat in the diet, which is that the amount of fat you eat is not especially important. It's the type of fat that you eat. Now, in the general population, and also among some vegans, there's this idea that we should be trying to get our diets as low as fat as possible. We should be avoiding all plant, not just all fatty animal foods, but all plant sources of fat as well. And this belief has come from a couple of different places. One is that government guidelines, like the dietary guidelines, recommend a reduction in total fat as a way of helping people reduce their saturated fat. That's not relevant to vegans, because we already eat a diet that's low in saturated fat. As soon as you trade in animal foods for plant foods, you're eating less saturated fat just like that. And even high-fat plant foods are low in saturated fat. So this kind of recommendation doesn't really mean anything to us. The second issue is that back in 1990, Dr. Dean Ornish did a study using a very low-fat vegetarian diet, lacto-ovo-vegetarian diet, as part of a program to impact heart disease. And he had no high-fat plant foods in his diet. It was about 10% fat. And the results were a small reduction in the amount of atherosclerosis in the arteries of his subjects. The problem with that study is that there were so many different variables, so many different lifestyle and diet changes that we don't know which ones are responsible for the beneficial effects. It's very unlikely that it was the low-fat content of the diet, because we know from other research, from lots of research, that higher fat plant foods are protective of heart health. And so taking those out of the diet isn't going to make your heart any healthier. So it was probably other things in the Ornish study that were responsible for the effects. The fact that the diet was so low in saturated fat, it was high in fiber and antioxidants, his subjects lost weight, all of those things would have a tremendously great effect on heart disease. And those were probably the things that were responsible, not the fat. Eating some higher fat plant foods is good for you. Nuts and seeds are excellent sources of zinc, and remember I said that that's a nutrient that can fall short sometimes in vegan diet, so we don't want to be eliminating foods that are a good source of zinc. There is a very compelling and very large body of research showing that people who eat nuts have better heart health. Eating nuts protects heart health, and so it's because of the type of fat that's in the nuts, the type of protein, the type of phytochemicals. Nuts are a very complex and interesting package of heart healthy benefits and factors. So it's if you're on a diet to lower blood cholesterol and improve your heart health, it really, really is smart to include some nuts in that diet. For people with diabetes, eating nuts and monounsaturated fats like the ones found in olive oil can be very beneficial for control of blood glucose. And finally, replacing carbohydrates with plant fats improves cholesterol profiles. It helps your LDL bad cholesterol to drop without lowering the HDL good cholesterol. This is what the Harvard School of Public Health has to say about that. They say good fats, monounsaturated and polyunsaturated fats, lower disease risk. Bad fats, saturated and especially trans fats, increase disease risk. Foods high in good fats include vegetable oils, nuts, seeds, and fish. Now, of course, they're including fish because of the omega-3 fats, and we've already seen that you can get those omega-3 fats from vegan sources, from plant sources, and that's a better way to get them. But this is a more ordinary way to get them, so that's what they talked about. And this really does show us where the consensus of opinion about fats is now. When I first became a vegan dietitian about 25 years ago, I promoted very, very low fat diets. I promoted elimination of nuts and seeds and oils and anything that had some fat in it. But the science has evolved, and we have to evolve with it. And I've had to change my perspective, and most nutrition experts have, and we are realizing now that telling people to cut back on their fat is not necessary. Telling them to get rid of the saturated fat is necessary. And of course, that's a plant-based diet. Now, these healthy sources of fat are high in calories, and so they can crowd other healthy foods out of your diet, so you don't want to be pouring buckets of olive oil all over your salads, and you don't want to be snacking on nuts all day. But you can eat these foods, use them condiment style, use them as embellishments to dishes. Don't go out of your way to avoid them. They're not bad for you. Healthy vegans need to also pay attention to supplements, because there are some supplements that are necessary in vegan diets and also some that are necessary in omnivore diets. I'm going to talk about those too. Vitamin D is an example of a supplement that is important for everyone. The only good natural source of vitamin D is fish, and you would have to eat swordfish or salmon every single day in order to meet your vitamin D needs. That's not practical, it's certainly not sustainable, and it's not the way most people are meeting their vitamin D needs. The only other foods that have vitamin D are fortified foods. People often think that cow's milk is a good source of vitamin D. It's not. It only has it because it's added to it, it's supplemented with it. So for most of us, we need to think about some other source of vitamin D. We evolved to make all the vitamin D we need by exposing our skin to sunlight, but many factors interfere with that. Smog, clouds, sunscreen with an SPF over 8 will all inhibit vitamin D synthesis in your skin. The darker your skin is, the more sun exposure you need. The older you are, the more sun exposure you need, especially when you hit 50 or 60, you need to really get more exposure. And then if you live in a place like Madison, Wisconsin, where the sunlight is weak in the wintertime, it's really hard. The research shows that vitamin D2 is as effective as vitamin D3 in maintaining healthy vitamin D status. Now, iodine is a nutrient we don't hear too much about in vegan diets, but we really should. It's important for thyroid health, and worldwide, iodine deficiency is a very serious public health problem. Fish can be a good source of iodine, but most Americans are getting the bulk of their iodine from iodized salt and from dairy products. Dairy has it because it's in the feed that's fed to the cows, and it's also in the cleaning solutions that are used to clean the cows and the milking equipment. It leaches into the milk. Vegetables can also be a very good source of iodine, but it depends on where they're grown. It depends on how much iodine is in the soil. So you never really know how much iodine you're getting from your diet naturally. And therefore, it's a good idea to give your iodine intake just a little boost with a little bit of a supplemental source. And that can be a 1/4 teaspoon per day of iodized salt. Keep in mind that most of the salt that's added to processed foods is not iodized. That's where most people are getting most of their salt, and it's not getting any iodized. So you want to use a salt shaker and choose iodized salt. Or you could take a small supplement, 90 to 150 micrograms of iodine, just 3 to 4 times per week, because this is just to give your iodine intake a little boost, just a little bit of insurance. Sea vegetables can be a really excellent source of iodine, but the amounts are very variable, and some of them have excessively high amounts of iodine, so that if you're eating them all the time, it could actually end up causing thyroid problems. It can cause toxicity. So it doesn't mean that you shouldn't have sea vegetables, but I don't think that people should be eating them every day to get their iodine. I think that sea vegetables should be limited to maybe 3 or 4 times per week, and then depend on something else for your iodine, like iodized salt or a small supplement. And finally, in our discussion about supplements, we need to talk about vitamin B12, the vegan nutritionist's favorite nutrient. All of the vitamin B12 in the world is made by bacteria, and it does not occur naturally in plants. The consequences of vitamin B12 deficiency are serious. When blood levels fall below 200 picograms per milliliter, it can result in overt vitamin B12 deficiency, and that can cause anemia and nerve damage. But even when your vitamin B12 levels are high enough to prevent overt deficiency, suboptimal levels can be harmful to health. When blood levels are below 400 picograms per milliliter, this is associated with high levels of an amino acid called homocysteine in the blood. And high blood homocysteine is linked to increased risk of heart disease and of neurological problems, dementia, depression. So it has some potentially serious consequences. And these are people who are walking around who don't have overt nerve damage or anemia, so they think that their B12 is fine, but it's actually a little bit low and it's causing some chronic problems. These are 4 studies of homocysteine levels among non-vegetarians, lacto-ovo-vegetarians, and vegans who were not taking supplements. These are studies from different countries, Australia, Slovakian Republic, and 2 in Germany. The vegans are represented by the brown columns, and you can see that in all 4 cases they have the highest levels of homocysteine. In all 4 cases they are higher than the cutoff for healthy homocysteine. So this is showing that these non-supplementing vegans have at least suboptimal vitamin B12 status. There are many more studies that show the same thing. There are also many studies that show us that when vegans take supplements, their homocysteine levels are just fine. So that's all it comes down to. It's not a serious problem for vegans. As long as you're taking a B12 supplement, you won't have this problem. One issue in vitamin B12 nutrition is that some plant foods contain compounds called B12 analogs. They look just like vitamin B12, but they don't have any vitamin activity. And so you may see some of these foods listed on the internet or in popular books as being good sources of vitamin B12. They're not. They contain only analogs. And analogs are worse than useless because they also block absorption of active vitamin B12. So they increase your risk of deficiency rather than lowering it. So you don't want to be depending on it. It's okay to eat these foods as long as you're getting B12 from a reputable source. And there's also this idea that we can get enough vitamin B12 by eating unwashed organic produce. Aside from the fact that I don't know who would want to eat unwashed produce, this has not been shown to be true. This has not been shown to be reliable. In fact, there's evidence that even people who are eating small amounts of animal foods, like lacto-ovo-vegetarians, and people who are eating kind of flexitarian diets, omnivores who are trying to eat more healthfully, so they're using meats just condiment style, there's some evidence that some of these people have suboptimal vitamin B12 status. So this is another group, any omnivore who's trying to eat healthfully, or any lacto-ovo-vegetarian who's not eating cheese all day, may need vitamin B12 supplements. The Institute of Medicine, which is the organization that establishes nutrient requirements for Americans, says that all people over the age of 50 should take vitamin B12 supplements or use fortified foods, no matter what kind of diet they're eating. And that's because with aging, there are changes in digestion that make it more difficult to absorb vitamin B12 from animal foods because of the way it trends attached to proteins in animal foods. But it doesn't have any effect on the B12 that's in supplements or fortified foods. We can continue to absorb those just fine as we get older. So this is another group of people who need to take vitamin B12. We think that we vegans are so different and special for our vitamin B12 supplement needs, and there are lots of other people who need these supplements. Now, some animals can make and absorb their own vitamin B12. This is actually a picture that was taken in my front yard. This is a little baby fawn who's about 2 to 3 days old, and his mom is already bringing him around to my garden to teach him to eat expensive perennials. A smart mom, yeah. These animals are true herbivores, so they can the bacteria in their guts can produce vitamin B12 and they can absorb it. We have bacteria in our intestines that produce B12 also, but we can't absorb it. It's produced too far away from the site of absorption, so it doesn't do us any good. We do have a really good method for conserving and storing vitamin B12. We can store lots of it in our liver and our muscles. And this has led to the belief that we can go for as long as 3 years on a vegan diet without needing to take a vitamin B12 supplement. But that really depends on what your stores are like. If you were a vegetarian before you went vegan, or if you were one of those healthy omnivores, it's possible that you wouldn't have very big stores of vitamin B12. So waiting 3 years before you start supplementing is not a smart thing to do. There's no reason to do it. There's no disadvantage to starting with B12 supplements as soon as you start taking steps towards veganism. Vitamin B12 is absorbed best at small doses, so the less often we take it, the higher the dose we need to take. So if you're getting it from fortified foods like nutritional yeast, aim for 2 servings per day, providing 1.5 micrograms of vitamin B12 per serving. If you take a daily supplement, aim for 25 micrograms per day. Most vitamin B12 supplements have really huge doses of this vitamin. It's really hard to find pills that have less than 1,000 micrograms of vitamin B12. So if that's the kind of pill that you're taking, you can just take it 2 to 3 times per week, and that will be fine for your vitamin B12 needs. Now, I talked about 4 supplements: the omega-3 fats, vitamin B12, vitamin D, and iodine. And I want to give a little bit of perspective on that and look at these vegan supplements compared to how omnivores get these nutrients. Certainly, vegans need to have a supplement of vitamin B12 or use fortified foods. That's just, there's no way around that. We have to do it. Many omnivores need to do that as well, though. We just saw that anybody over the age of 50 has to be taking vitamin B12 supplements. People who are eating healthy omnivore diets that are not eating very much in the way of animal foods may need to take supplements as well, and so may lacto-ovo-vegetarians. So some omnivores are getting vitamin B12 by eating animal foods, but it is certainly not true that all of them are. Vitamin D is an issue for everyone. We all get it pretty much the same way. We get it from supplements, fortified foods, or sun exposure, regardless of the kind of diet we're eating. This is true for vegans and for omnivores as well. Iodine, we need a little boost in our iodine just to make sure we're getting enough, because we don't consume beverages that are contaminated with cleaning solutions. And finally, DHA and EPA, we don't really know who needs those supplements. We don't know if vegans need those if they're eating a heart healthy diet, but certainly lots of omnivores are taking fish oil supplements. It's a very popular thing. A lot of major health organizations recommend it. So I think it's a good idea to join the omnivores with this one and take these supplements on a regular basis, but get them from an ethical and sustainable source like algae. Now, even though I talked about a lot of things, I covered a lot of material, 2 minutes, okay. I covered a lot of material, and I'm going to summarize it in a minute. I want to talk very quickly about the importance of not making vegan diets too restrictive. This is what people think vegans eat on the left-hand side. They think we eat granola grass and tofu. And on the right-hand side, you see what we really eat, which is a vast array of foods, healthy foods and some treats. It is certainly important to base the bulk of your diet on whole plant foods, on whole grains and fruits and vegetables, legumes, nuts and seeds, soy foods if you enjoy them. That should be the bulk of your diet. It doesn't mean that every mouthful of food you eat has to be unprocessed perfection. Plant milks and juices, especially if they're fortified, can play a really big role in vegan diets, helping people to meet nutrient needs and helping their vegan diets to be more realistic so that they can stick with them for the long term. The same is true with veggie meats and veggie cheeses. I often hear these foods referred to as transition foods, which indicates that once we've gone vegan, we're supposed to stop eating them. Well, I've been vegan for 20 years and I couldn't live without tofurkey and Amy's vegan margarita pizza. I don't think there's any reason to stop eating these foods when you go vegan. If they make your diet fun, if they make it easier to be vegan, you need some convenience foods, it's fine to eat these. It's fine to cook with vegetable oils. These are healthy sources of plant. They will not make your diet unhealthy. And finally, because we vegans eat so many good things, and because we choose a diet that's based on an ethic of compassion, we deserve to have some treats and some indulgences, like coconut bliss. So, to quickly summarize, 7 habits of healthy vegans. Eat legumes. Aim for 2 to 3 servings per day of beans, peanuts, soy foods, or the honorary legumes, quinoa and pistachios. Eat a variety of fruits and vegetables. Eat lots of them, but eat a variety as well to make sure you're getting good sources of vitamin C and as many of your meals as possible to give iron absorption a boost. And make sure you're getting a good source of vitamin A every day, which is really easy to do. Get adequate calcium. Choose foods like leafy green vegetables, calcium-set tofu, fortified plant milks and juices, figs, almond butter, tahini. As soon as you know which foods provide calcium, it's really easy to meet needs on a vegan diet. Choose whole grains most of the time. It's okay to have some non-Twinkie refined grains in your diet. Includes whole bread and sprouted grains if you like them to boost zinc absorption. Be smart about fats. Consume sources of the essential fatty acid, alpha-linolenic acid, and again, those are listed on your handout. And use higher fat foods condiment style to increase nutrient content and interest in your meals. Take appropriate supplements. We all need fortified foods or supplements of vitamin B12. Just like omnivores, if we're not getting enough sun exposure, we need vitamin D. Taking a small supplement or using some iodized salt is a good way to just round out your iodine intake a little bit since you don't know how much you're getting. And finally, DHA and EPA, a small supplement may be important for helping to keep your plant-based diet, your vegan diet, heart healthy. And the supplements that we use, the ones derived from algae, are of course much more sustainable, much more ethical than fish oil supplements, which they have to go away. So our supplements are going to be the ones that everybody's going to be taking, hopefully. I was told I have, and finally, be flexible and enjoy your vegan diet. Mostly whole plant foods, but processed foods are absolutely okay if they help you meet nutrient needs and if they make your diet more realistic so that you can stick with this more ethical and more compassionate eating plan. Here's my information. If you'd like more, if you have questions, you'd like more information on vegan nutrition, you can visit my blog, theveganrd.com. I'm the Vegan RD on Twitter. I'm Ginny Messina on Facebook. And also on Pinterest if you'd like to see pictures of my cats and my knitting projects. And you can email me at ginnymessina@gmail.com if you have any questions about anything I said today or you'd like copies of my slides. And thank you.